The Lord be with you. And let us pray. Gracious Father, we give you thanks for another Sabbath day. Nourish us in this day so that we may know more about you, be closer to you, be redeemed in our spirit, be strengthened in our faith, and have our hearts open to the word that you would have for us. Be with him who teaches and those of us who hear, that together this conversation in Christ may strengthen us in all good things. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. How many have ever heard of Mount Nebo before? Oh, that's very good. How many have been there? All right, a few have been there. Very good. Well, we started this journey 3 weeks ago, telling the story of Moses and the bulrushes and floating in the Nile and growing up in the Pharaoh's palace and being an officer in the Pharaoh's army and leading the children of Israel out of Egypt and probably away from the forts and the armaments of the Pharaoh, down to the point of Sinai, to the mountain of Sinai, where we, of course, heard the story of the giving of the Ten Commandments and the oral law, which is considerably more specific than the Ten Commandments themselves. And now we continue that journey, if you will, over now to the eastern side of the Dead Sea, and of course the Jordan Valley in what was called in ancient times Transjordan, what is called today the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. But the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, unlike other names in the Middle East, is not so ancient. There's Syria, there's Lebanon, as Egypt and Libya, and you can think of others, all of which appear in biblical times as well. But the kingdom of Jordan is a British creation following the British Mandate when the British created the kingdom of Jordan in payback to the Hashemites, who had been faithful during the British Mandate. Not everybody had been. It was a troublesome time, and the Brits were glad to get out of there, but the Hashemites had been pretty supportive of the British Mandate, and so the Kingdom of Jordan was created. So it's a relatively new kingdom. It doesn't go back to ancient times, although we will hear phrases like Transjordan, which means across the other side of the Jordan, but it was not a national name. It's known today as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, but in biblical times, it was the land of the Amorites, it was the land of the Edomites, it was the land of the Midianites, all of whom the Israelites had to deal with and ultimately conquer as they moved into the Promised Land, because the Promised Land was not just in Canaan, as Israel is today on the west bank of the Jordan mostly, but it was in fact on both the east and the west banks of the Jordan. For example, in this Transjordan area, you would find the tribes of Reuben, of Gad, and of Manasseh up and down this area on the east side of the Jordan. Now, I don't know whether it's for you like it is for me, but getting east and west straightened out over there drives me nuts. I always want to count things on my left as the west, because that's the way it is here, and I ought to count the things on the east as over there. So that in fact, when you're over there, the east is this way and the west is that way, usually, unless you're headed south, then it's the other way, but the general orientation is hard to get together. We talk about the West Bank territory. That's the territories on the west side of the Jordan. Question? That's where Palestine is on the west side. Palestine is on the... Well, let me go back. Historically, the whole area was given the name of Palestine by the Romans. So that's both east and west of the Jordan. The whole place was Palestine. 2 sessions from now, I'll talk about Galilee of the nations, a phrase used in the Gospels. And I'll talk about the Roman and international significance of Galilee. Why does Jesus start his work in Galilee? That was the best place to try a new idea, because people were coming in and out. As you went south, you got more into the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the toughness of it all. And finally, it will be in Jerusalem that they don't want to hear anything he has to say. But in Galilee, there's an open audience, because it is the Galilee of the nations, the Galilee of changing ideas. And we'll talk about that 2 sessions from now. But the whole area was named Palestine. Today, the Palestinians are looked upon as being those on the West Bank, in West Bank territories. The Brits would tell you, and some others would tell you, that their intention originally was for Jordan to be the Palestinian state, but it never worked out that way, and I don't want to go there this morning. But this area, unlike other areas, we talked about the arid, rather dry nature of the Sinai, except for places where rains came in droves and you could collect water. This is a rather fertile area. If you look on page 4, where we talk about the land of Gilead, that's a pretty nice picture of this territory that could have been taken right from the top of Mount Nebo, which is in the region of Gilead. Anyway, comments about the pictures themselves, and then I'll go on. The first picture is a rather crude-looking structure. It's little more than a shed that covers the remnants of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century churches on Mount Nebo, and here is the inside of that shed. You see 2 Muslim visitors, because this is the mountain of Moses. This is the memorial to Moses. This is where Moses will die, as I'll get to the story, and therefore it has another key role in the life of Moses, which is principally important to Islam as well as to Christianity and to Judaism. You'll see here some of the remnants, and you'll see also the terrazzo floors. These are original. They go back from the 6th, 5th, and, are you ready for this? 3rd century. This is a long time with a lot of building, and it was clearly prominently important to Christians during that period. Look, if you will, in the next page, and you will see what Moses maybe saw at the top of the page. He didn't have a camera to take the picture of it like this fellow, but it looks over the Jordan Valley, only there isn't any Jordan anymore. The Dead Sea is slightly north of this man's posture on the platform, and the Dead Sea is the end of the flow downward of water, but there's still a Jordan Valley that you're looking across. Then in the bottom picture on that page, you have mosaics from the New Baptistry. New Baptistry is in the 500s CE. It's the 2nd baptistry built there. And look at the intricacy and beauty of the terrazzo floors, and you'll see some remnants of the font up at the top of that picture. Then turning the next page, if you will, we see the bronze serpent, a modern sculpture of Moses' staff, much bigger than Moses. You see the people around it, so you see this size of the bronze serpent staff. But this was the serpent, and you remember in John 3:14, Jesus says, "For as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so I must be lifted up." John 3:14. So remembering the history of Moses at this place, and also the application that Jesus uses of that same issue, that sculpture is there. Then at the bottom is a picture of a mosaic cross. The altar is new, but the mosaic cross is from an original altar that's dated between the 3rd and 4th century. And that's original mosaic there. And then the last page, I already mentioned the hills of Gilead. and we'll talk about that in due time. You just can't leave this topic without singing at least one stanza, "There is a balm in Gilead." So now let me start again and start over again. What makes these places so important? If you are a historian or just love history, seeing these places is exciting because they speak to history and they give us some insight into what was happening. If you're a theologian, this is an important thing because we see into the very early life of the church. We mentioned Egeria last week. Well, Egeria was here as well. And she sees a nearly finished basilica in the late 4th century. That's the 300s and something. Now let's count back again. It would have been absolutely deadly to have built a church before the mid-4th century because it was illegal to be a Christian, punishable by death or being cat food for the lions. So that it was simply not possible for the Christians to build churches before Constantine issued the Edict of Toleration in 312 CE or AD. And at that point, then Christians could come out from underground. And if Egeria could have gone here in the late 300s and found a finished basilica there, they were up to building in really much of a hurry. There's even some evidence that there was a lesser structure here before the one that Egeria saw in 382. So the bottom line is to say this was for early Christians a profoundly significant holy place. They will not only build this building at Mount Nebo, remembering that this was Moses' last stop as he looked over into the promised land, they immediately started building here, and they would build in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries additions to the original church, so that it became a huge emplacement, including a fully operating monastery by the 6th century. By the time of Justinian, by the Byzantine period, this is an operating, functioning Christian community for both pilgrims and for both the operation of a monastery at that point. So Mount Nebo, not particularly on the top 10 list for most Christians, was for the early Christian church a significantly important location. Now, if we turn the page for a moment, we can read the story as it appears in Deuteronomy. Top of the page, Roman numeral 2, first from the Scriptures. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab. Remember I said this was the Moabite territory, Edomite territory, to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. Then the Lord showed him the whole land. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day, no one knows where the grave is. Now, curiously, there is a grave of Moses about 12 miles southeast of Jerusalem and 6.8 miles east of Jericho. I've been there, I've seen it, and it's highly regarded, particularly by Islam, as the grave of Moses. What I find interesting is that we know in the 21st century where he's buried, but I don't think anybody's dug it to find out. But the writer of Deuteronomy in the 6th to 7th century had no idea where it was. So I look at it with a grain of salt, and it is on the other side of what would have been the Jordan Valley, which Moses was not allowed to cross into. So it's probably something nice to see, but not much more than that. What did Moses see? Well, the top of the mountain at that point is 3,300 feet above sea level. It looks over the Jordan Valley. Remember I said the Jordan River is not flowing anymore because we are just to the southern tip of the Dead Sea. The Jordan River is not flowing anymore out of the Dead Sea. And by the way, just a side light, you know, lots of preachers have never been to the Holy Land. And that's all right. Not everybody can afford to accomplish that. But now I'm losing it. In the biblical dictionary, the 12 volumes that came, Interpreter's Bible that came out while I was in seminary, there's quite a thing on the Dead Sea. And what it says is because everything flows into the Dead Sea and nothing comes out, there is this terrible odor, just the way it is when there are people that take everything and give nothing. Well, when you get to the Dead Sea, there's no odor. It is not dead. Things like we're normally used to can't live there, but microorganisms do. And it's a great source of resource. In fact, there are 2 Dead Seas now, and there's a land bridge across it, because it has been mined so heavily by the Jordanians and the Israelis that there's not enough water coming down the Jordan to keep it filled. But there's nothing that flows out of it. And contrary to some preachers, it has no bad odor because it takes everything and gives nothing. It's a nice story, but not true. In fact, people go and they float. In fact, there's a picture on a postcard in Israel and the West Bank with a fellow laying flat on his back reading a newspaper in the Dead Sea because the density is so high. At any rate, back to the story. From the hill of Mount Nebo, 3,300 feet high, he could look over the Jordan Valley and could easily see Jericho with its waving palm trees. On a very clear day, he might have seen Jerusalem. His chances would be better today than they were then because Jerusalem is now a major city and a major holy site with some high-rise buildings. So on a reasonably clear day, you can see Jerusalem. But Jerusalem in that day was still a Jebusite city. David had not conquered it. It was on the northern side of the Ophel Hill, and we would be on the southern side, so seeing something on the northern side would prove to be relatively difficult. But he could see as far as Jerusalem for sure, and he could see Jericho, but he could not see the Galilee and places above that. But nonetheless, he saw the vast and verdant land called Jericho and beyond. And as I noted, after wandering in the Sinai for 40 years, seeing the palm trees of Jericho should have been exciting enough. Now, I've mentioned already about the significance of these early excavations that talk about how early the Christian church began to see Mount Nebo as a major significant place. Now, I mentioned historians liking it. They can do all kinds of things and write all kinds of histories. But for people of faith, it means something as well. My grandmother was from Switzerland. There was no Lutheran church in Portsmouth, Virginia, and she wasn't particularly looking for a Lutheran church. She was looking for a Swiss Reformed church. Well, there wasn't one of those in Portsmouth, Virginia either. So somebody told Nana that the closest thing she would find in the United States would be the Lutheran church. So she took that at face value and she gathered some friends, and together they formed First Lutheran Church. And I've laughed about that before. With so many Baptists in the South, there'll never be a second Lutheran church. But at any rate, I grew up in that first Lutheran church, which incidentally was named Lutheran Memorial when it began. But then they found out in Blacksburg, Virginia, there was already a Lutheran Memorial, so they changed it to First Lutheran. Now, why do I mention that? Because you see, in Switzerland, for the Eucharist, my grandmother had said these same words: "The Lord be with you, and also with you. Lift up your hearts, we lift them up unto the Lord. Let us give thanks unto the Lord our God. It is meet and right so to do." In Switzerland, my grandmother had said those words. But then we discover not just about Nana, but about church history, that by the middle of the 2nd century in Egypt, there was found a manuscript called the Didache, the Teachings. And the Didache had, among other things, the rules of the church, but it also had a liturgy. And guess what the liturgy was? "The Lord be with you, and also with you. Lift up your hearts, we lift them up unto the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God." Christians have been saying this around bread and wine since virtually the beginning. Which reminds us that this church is not simply the things we can see. The church is always made up, as I said a few weeks ago, the saints triumphant, the saints alive, and the saints who yet will dance on our graves, who will sing thanksgiving to God because through us and our faithfulness, they have heard about the gospel, because the church is never more than a generation or two away from extinction. All we need to do to kill the church is to stop telling the story to our children.
I love to tell the story.
Absolutely, and you sang it this morning. So that for the church, these ancient sites are part of putting one foot with the fellowship that came before us, while at the same time living with the fellowship that is ours, and preserving them so that the generations after us can go there as well. So that's important for us to understand that these holy sites where Christians have gathered are significant to our life as well as to theirs. So we go to these places and we marvel. I marvel at least at the size of the construction. Look at page 1 again in the columns. The large mosaic floors. And the Franciscans have built this not too attractive shed over the whole thing to provide a worship space, but also simply to protect the excavations. This is the first day we really have done the big dig in truth, because this is a major dig. So at any rate, why is this place important? Well, maybe I should stop. It's in the footnotes, but it's in small print. And I've gotten a hint. Sometimes people don't read the large print, so maybe I should talk about the small print. Why doesn't Moses get to go to the Promised Land? I mean, he led them through Sinai. He led them out of Egypt. He's earned it. Why doesn't he get to go? Well, it's over a little thing, it seems. In the wilderness of Zin, which is over near Petra, the Israelites in their wanderings were without water, and God told Moses to speak to a rock, and it would give water. And instead, Moses struck the rock, making it appear that Moses had brought the water out of the rock, and not giving glory to God. Not only did it get Moses in trouble, but it got Aaron, his brother and sidekick, in trouble. Neither of them were allowed to enter the Promised Land. Aaron died on Mount Hor and was there buried. And Moses will look at the Promised Land, something that Aaron didn't get to do. Will look at the Promised Land, but then will die. When Moses dies, we have a major transition of leadership. Somebody has to take over the charisma and the leadership skills of Moses. I know you all know who that was, and you do. Who was it?
He fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls are coming tumbling down.
Yeah, but who was it? Joshua, thank you. Joshua is the person who takes over the leadership, and that transition also takes place on Nebo. So it is a point of major transition for the Israelites and their beginning of the conquest of Canaan. Moses will not be involved at all in the conquest of Canaan. He had a shot at it. Does anybody remember what the shot was that he had at it? They pulled up as far as Jericho and sent spies. Remember, the spies were the ones that Rahab rescued and let down out of the city wall. Well, they sent spies. The spies came back saying it's a land of milk and honey, but those people there are giants. And they decided not to go and backed off. Just as the story goes. That added another 20 years in the wilderness, by the way. Somebody said, why did Moses wander 40 years in the wilderness? And they said, well, like every other man, he won't stop and ask directions. Question, comments. So we have here this marvelous place called Mount Nebo that not everybody sees because it's in now Jordan, and most trips to the Holy Land center primarily in Israel and the West Bank as they're able. So not everybody gets to Nebo. But it is quite a sight. And the Franciscans since 1993 have done an incredible job of unearthing, more of the remains of the early Christian community. Actually, there are about 50 fine pictures available of these mosaics. I picked one that struck me as interesting because it's the new baptistry. It comes with Justinian's building in 570. But under it, incidentally, was another terrazzo floor that was only about 15 years old, and they've managed by carefully lifting to lift the one floor and expose the second floor, and now it hangs in on one of the museum walls. Questions? Comments?
God, I got to go back a little bit.
Okay.
Because when I was a kid, we were told Moses didn't get to go to the Promised Land because he broke the first copy of the Ten Commandments.
No, that's not right.
Well, obviously, but he did that in anger because what? People came down, people were worshiping Baal, right?
That's right. They were worshiping a golden calf.
So that was just his own
anger. And he went back up and got a second copy from the Xerox machine on top of Sinai.
So what's the theology of that?
I can only hear God saying, you mean I got to chisel all that out again?
So why is that, what's the theological message there? That we literally break the commandments, or is there anything with that?
Nothing much has been made of that except his anger and the rebellion of the people. While they were there, Aaron had collected the gold from the people there and melted it down to make the golden calf. So it was a major turning back of the people. There had been other times when they complained. Lack of food, lack of meat, lack of water. By the way, the rock outside of Petra still gives water, so he hit it pretty hard. Outside of Petra, yeah. This is, Petra, I should perhaps stop and talk about too. Petra was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom, and the Nabateans had this thing back in a canyon, which was almost unassailable. Nobody could get to it. The Romans finally figured out how to do it because they located the water supply and cut it off, and that stops it. But the Nabateans, and you can go to Petra today, it's an awesome thing to see. And the Nabateans were tradesmen, and they ran camel caravans across from their area to the Sinai into Egypt and back. And they were heavy into the trades, the Nabatean trade. And they had cities along the way. You remember I said we can't find the staging camps for armies, but they found significant staging camps for the Nabatean camel trades. Are you giving me a sign, Doris?
Yeah, we can't hear you. Pull the microphone up.
Put it up?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So usually she's waving a calendar to tell me it's time to quit. The Franciscans now on Mount Nebo maintain a very active monastery, and they also maintain the headquarters of the Franciscan Archaeological Institute, and they support pilgrims and provide worship opportunities as requested and so forth. It is a increasingly active site, as it was once very early on. They wouldn't have spent the money. They wouldn't have spent the time to build these huge basilicas if there wasn't a tremendous flow of people to this location, which once again is somewhat 50 miles south of Amman, Jordan, somewhere in that neighborhood of distance. I never drive the bus, so I'm not sure I know how far.
Amman is on the west bank, right?
No, Amman is the capital of Jordan on the east bank.
The east bank.
Yeah, Amman is the capital of Jordan on the east bank. Okay, any questions further? Things to see there? Well, first I've mentioned the view. You can almost miss seeing the view because you are confronted with these awesome expanses of excavations with these just innumerable mosaics that are in such gorgeous shape that you kind of spend all the time there, and you never think to go stand at the brow of the mountain and see where Moses looked over at that time. The sculpture of Moses' staff is probably worth a few moments of pay. Of course, it's much larger than the staff Moses would have had, but it has a significant role in the story of the Israelites being preserved from the plague of serpents and of Christ using it as a symbol of the cross. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. It's used also today very, very regularly by whom? I'm sorry? Doctors, yeah, physicians. It's the symbol of the physicians. I don't know if I realized that symbol had a serpent, a venomous serpent at the top. I'd want to go to that doctor, but at any rate.
Just the bill. When you got paid for it, that's when the venom comes.
That's where the venom comes. The memorial of the Church of Moses is, in fact, what I've mentioned before. It's on page 1. That's the Memorial Church of Moses. This is the inside. I think, Doris, when you were there, this was not finished, was it? Was there an inside like this? I wouldn't think. I think this is later. It's an ongoing work. It was done when I was there 2 years ago. And then, it continues to have significance. There have been 2 papal visits. St. Pope John Paul II was there in 2000 and planted an olive tree by the Byzantine chapel as a symbol of peace. And then Pope Benedict XVI visited in 2009, giving a major speech, and he scanned the horizon as Moses might have done. So it continues to have significant importance and probably ascending importance again. Curiously, in the 16th century, I have the actual date here, and I'm calling it from memory. It could have been the 17th century. It became abandoned, and nobody knows why. If I had to make a guess, I would say it was because of the strong Islamic presence in that region by that time. Initially, Muhammad, as I mentioned last week, in his patent to the St. Catherine's Monastery, was very explicit that Christians should be given privilege. That's not done in Mosul, that's not done in other areas, so this very significant statement of Muhammad has been lost in people's consciousness. But it could well be that by that time, this is a post-Crusade period when issues were running hot about Christians, because the Christians had been in the Crusades, quite frankly, as ruthless as some Islamic people had been as well. In some ways, we are getting in the jihad the same thing we delivered there in the 12th, 11th, and 12th centuries. Because the Christian Crusades were really a jihad to rid the Holy Land of the infidels. I think that's what a jihad is. So in our history, for a long time I wouldn't wear a stole with a Jerusalem cross on it because it comes from the Crusaders. But when you get old, you think some battlefields are not worth fighting on. So at any rate, finally, all of this is in the land of Gilead. And Jeremiah shouts out in the 8th chapter, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician in Gilead that can heal my people there?" And he goes on to make the point that the people are beyond healing because of their attitudes and so forth. But the phrase balm of Gilead becomes to be a very popular phrase not only within the Bible, but also outside of it. So nobody quite knows what the balm of Gilead was. I notice on Amazon.com you can buy the balm of Gilead. I'm not sure that has any proximity to the 2nd or 3rd millennium BC object of the balm of Gilead. But we do know this. Remember I mentioned the Nabatean traders? The Nabatean traders delivered things from this fertile region to Rome, and then earlier to Egypt. You can't ship by camel fresh corn or tomatoes or any other such thing. You can only deliver, for the most part, processed products. Dried grapes, dried dates, those kind of things. So the balm of Gilead would have been a transportable and saleable product. But what it was, nobody is quite sure. Was it a rub that took away pain? Was it a cosmetic? Was it a perfume? Nobody is quite sure. Anybody here use the balm of Gilead? Yeah, Gene.
Well, I was going to say, balm of Gilead heals the wounded soul and makes the sin sick.
That's what the hymn says, but that's not what the Bible tells us.
Well, what's the stuff you put on people when they get buried? You know, the herb. What did the wise men bring? They brought incense and myrrh. Was it one of those things?
No.
No. Okay.
Myrrh is myrrh. We know about that. Yeah. Actually, nobody knows for sure. But at any rate, as I said, if you go to Amazon.com, you can buy whatever is being sold as the balm of Gilead. When Doris and I were standing in Tombstone National Park, which is part of the Yukon, just under the Arctic Circle by a handful of miles. We have spent the day with a naturalist who, for most part, just about drove me crazy, but that's another story. He kept pointing out rare ducks. And with my eyesight, I could see the duck. I couldn't see what was rare about it. One of them was a square neck something, and I couldn't see the neck at all, much less know it was square. But anyway, at one of the points, we were standing by this rushing stream. You just wanted to stand there. It made a lot of noise, and it was crystal clear. And it just rolled along there with great... And around our feet were all the flowers that bloom in mid-June in that cold territory, you know. Flowers that live in that area, like flowers, incidentally, that live in the wilderness of Judea. Understand they have a very short time to sprout and to bloom and to die. In a matter of days, the sandy yellow hills of Judea can turn red and green rather, and in another couple of days they can be covered with little yellow flowers. A week at the most, and then they gradually die because there's still no rain to keep them going. But in the cold regions of the Yukon, vegetation has some of that same adaptive ability. And so we're standing just in little white flowers. I remember, Doris, am I right about that? White flowers just all around us. And then our naturalist guide says, take a moment and simply sniff the air. And we did. And he said, you've heard in the Bible about the balm of Gilead. And we all nodded, we had. And he said, well, what you're smelling is the balm of Gilead tree, and there's one right there. Well, who knows? What it needs is a lot of water. What it needs is a lot of sunlight. And in the southern part of Jordan, it can get blessed cold. So maybe no botanist believes it is the original, but some believe it is a part of the genus of the tree. We don't know. But if you ever sing, there is a balm in Gilead, then you can say, well, there probably was something like that. And then, of course, the Black American, African American spiritual talk to make the spirit whole, as Jean has said.
Sometimes I feel discouraged and feel my lasting pain, but then the Holy Spirit restores my soul again. There is a moment in etc.
Go ahead, do it, finish it.
What's that? There is a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead that heals the sin-sick soul. And the rest of the story was the very first anthem I ever sang in this very space of the church. And Pastor Dan wrote me a note and sent it to my home and said, I'll do it.
He liked it.
I'm telling you what, the Lord works in weird ways.
He liked
It's
it.
going full circle.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, any more questions about this topic? Because we're about done. Well, some are asleep. They won't ask any questions. Next week, Capernaum, or as they say in Israel, Capernaum. Capernaum was the center of Jesus' ministry. I liken it to Minneapolis and Billy Graham's press, where he sends out all that stuff from Minneapolis. And we'll talk about Capernaum as a very prosperous and unique town. We'll see archaeological digs there that are very significant. And we'll talk about a similar town, Chorazim, which is about 5 miles away from Capernaum. So we'll do those two things. Then the following week we'll be talking about Tabka, the loaves and the fishes, and there are really 2 Tabka locations. And then we'll talk about Galilee, around the Galilee, because now back to the issue about Palestine. The eastern side of the Galilee was really Roman territory, less than Jewish. And so it was called the region of the Decapolis, the region of the 10 cities. Amman, Jordan, was in Roman days Philadelphia. And there is a Roman stadium in Amman, Jordan, from the days of, quote, Philadelphia, unquote. But that's getting way ahead of the thing. I want to talk about how the Galilee spawned this tremendous amount of commerce and trade and travel, and why it was called the Galilee of the nations. So that's where we're going. Thank you all for being here today. Good to have you here. And I hope if I let you out a little early, you won't be disappointed about that. Thank you. Could you hear?
Hurry.
Could you hear?
Yeah.
I can't forget how to turn this thing off. There it was. We didn't go. You were in Jordan, but we didn't go to Mount Nebo. Did we go to Nebo?
They didn't have, I don't remember this chapter.
No, none of that stuff was finished then.
1995.
What year were you there?
95.
All right, the Franciscans bought it in 93,
Yeah.
so that wasn't done yet.
No, I don't remember the cross. It was a pretty
No.
barren site, as I recall.
Right, that's my remembrance too, yeah, sure.
But I remember there was a dust storm, so we couldn't see anything.
What's that?
There was a dust storm over Israel.
I didn't remember that.
Couldn't see Jericho or... No. It was pretty dusty there.
Yeah, I remember we were at Jerash and you had your arms around one of, no, you were laying on top of one of those.
Yeah.
That's been rebuilt. I had not seen it. The day I was there, it rained so hard. Nobody, starting with me, wanted to get off the bus. I've never seen such rain in my life. Certainly not to walk around a dig that big. But that's been largely improved too.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I had to do it, but you couldn't have shut me up with that song. You know you were baiting me.
What?
Yeah. You know it.
I know never to bait you.
When I was a kid, Christ Lutheran in Bethesda, we had this thing to keep the kids entertained in Sunday school. It was a board game. It was called On the Road to Capernaum. I can't remember it. I looked on it for eBay. I've looked on it for everywhere to try to find an old board game. Do you remember it? On the Road to... Oh my God. I think that's what it's called. I went on and tried to find it called On the Road to Galilee, and of course there's 1,000, new things that way. But it was something about that. So when you talk about Capernaum, I'm going to be looking for the clue so I can find
if I get to go over in November, and that's a little unsure.
Yeah.
The place called the Boat which is where the first century boat has been restored, and they have quite a restaurant and gift shop there.
So maybe that.
And the gift shop is really, really helpful. You go in and say, I'm looking for thus and so.
I'll check it.
They are really gracious and helpful.
So I was quizzing you because, Nathan's getting married to Hiba from Jordan. We had the second engagement party because of the big Jordanian-Syrian. The engagement party is more important than the wedding, it seems like. And, of course, they talk about driving across Amman. Her mother is a Palestinian. He's a Syrian, Muslim. So I got it, I wrote out I got the thing printed out with the codicy that you had last week, right? I got that. Now I got to go find myself a history of Jordan. So it was Philadelphia back in Roman times. They called it Philadelphia. Good dope. And they probably will hate it when I tell them it's called the Hashemite Kingdom because they think of the British as invaders. And just like in Africa, they can't stand the French and the English now because they took over Africa.
Hashemite family was very loyal to the Brits.
But that's also where the king comes from. The king of Jordan is the Hashemite?
Hashemite, sure.
Yeah, okay,
And so as they are pulling out, they make him the king.
Yeah, exactly. But from what you said also, there was always a king of Jordan. The king of Jordan was always an important part of that
Not
world,
much.
wasn't it?
Not much. Your kings in those days were often city kings.
Yeah, right.
For example, Jerusalem had a king and this kind of thing.
Right. So that's the way the Romans also ruled with their...
But Jordan really was four kingdoms: the Ammonites, the Amorites, the Moabites, and the Edomites, all part of that strip of land.
So you see, that's what the next step is. I got to find out what Hiba's mother is, what chain of that she is.
Yeah, she may not know.
I don't know. They're all...
I'm not sure they preserve that very carefully.
I know I'm Swedish and Norwegian, so maybe she knows something. I don't know.
Be fun to look.
It's great.
Be fun to look.
The first solo I ever sang, Dan wrote me the note. I said, man, this church wants me to sing here regular.
Well,
1985.
Was great today.
Oh, it's easy. It's easy.
Oh, dear. They call it the Cowboy Church. She loved it. I think so. Helen, she loved it.
Cowboy church.
The Cowboy Church. Florida.
We don't horse around with Jesus, right? How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right.
A lot of action around this place. Seems like every week we come, they're calling or hiring somebody else. It's pretty interesting.
Well, right now, it's a strategy of absorbing Epiphany. The church goes through
Absorbing as a second site or is
second site.
That takes care of the old.
The belief that's what working here would work there if it had a chance. So if we put our own people in there and direct it,
interesting.
it might happen. Certainly wouldn't go anywhere with them. In fact, they both feed on banana peels at this point. Lost leadership, lost money. They can't call a full-time pastor. And as I always felt as bishop that a half-time pastor was simply prolonging a funeral. It just doesn't work. Unless you got something out in the countryside that's got four families that have been for 4 generations, they'll keep piling money into it.
So I saw Eric Dahl. Is it Eric Dahl?
He's the president out there. Did you see him here? Did you see him here? Was he here this morning?
No, I didn't see him yet. No, he's coming for the meeting.
Oh, okay.
We went to the Catholic
Yeah, I think
That's interesting. Well, there's a Lutheran church out there, right? that part of 29?
No,
Outside of that one?
no, of course, it's on the old Columbia Pike, which is unfortunate. Just the way things go. Their property originally ran to the new 29, but they thought they didn't need it, so they sold it. But it wouldn't have helped them much except for visibility, because
Right.
you can't do an entrance or an exit on 29. Limited access. But anyhow, some of the saints are dying, and some of the really key people have moved away. I mean, really seriously key people moved away. Large leadership roles. No fault of the church. I mean,
So,
it's just-
so what's the theory that, I mean, I understand the theory that if you bring the resources to it, it may help it, but it's almost like a mission church at this point, isn't it? It's not,
Yeah, it is that from our standpoint, yes. From theirs, maybe not. The only other one in the Synod is Lord of Life, and they took over
in Virginia.
Centerville. What was the name of that church? Doesn't matter. And it's now Lord of Life too.
Uh-huh.
And they run a different program there. And when they built there, they built a different kind of facility. Originally, this is now information is 8 years old. Originally, they had a big drama program at Lord of Life. Not necessarily religious drama, just drama. People wanted to do drama, and I think by the time I retired, their plan showed building a facility that was conducive to serious drama work at Centerville, so that it would be part of their operation. But it would, and they rotate their pastors out there. For example, that's not the plan here, incidentally. Not thus far, anyway. They rotate their pastors so that, once every 6 weeks, Quali goes out and preaches, and they have a pastor assigned there who works out of that facility. But then they send the big dogs out a couple times a month too, and their publications include both locations and all of that. So. And that's something of what David's working on here. I think maybe Epiphany still thinks that with this shot in the arm, they'll get big enough they can go it on their own. I don't think even we expect that. I think, we can carry them here. They can carry them here. I'm not. But let's see.
Quite a challenge.
Well, the ICC makes it very simple.
Oh, yeah, for this, yeah. No, I just think,
We can run back and forth, cover hospitals and things like that, which we do. We should do less of it now with this next guy.
I remember, we did an analysis of St. Luke's population back when I was there, and the predominant population was up to 29 cars.
That's right.
It wasn't in Silver Spring.
Well, I wanted to do something similar to that with our congregation over around the fringe of what I call Vatican City over there. We've got merged a church in the 50s, early 60s, and 2 pastors and 60 kids in confirmation and everything else. And by the time I got here, it was in the pits. Nice building, nice facility. And I talked that council then into saying we'd pick them up and share programs. Well, they didn't have enough to have a choir, but we did. They could sing in our choir. and our choir could sing at their place periodically. And I put together a thing, vacation church school, we'll do twice. We'll do it at your house, we'll do it at this house. Because those things do pull people in that aren't your own. And the idea was, first problem I had with our council was they figured I was doing too much already. They didn't want to add that to it, but they finally warmed up to it. Rick got really excited about it, and so we had a package, and the package was, we would share pastors with them. Between what we had sitting in the pew retired and a couple we had. And we would share programs with them. I thought it was a freebie, a neat freebie. And they said, "You're not listening to us, we're tired, we don't want to do this anymore." They were just burned out.
Yeah, she is.
So then they, quote, merged with Resurrection in D.C.,
That was a black church.
which is that's the oldest black church in the country,
Yeah.
black Lutheran church in the country. And that's still there, but it's going nowhere. Guys are as lazy as
That was a beautiful facility, potentially.
That was so neat to see those two.
So that would have been a great thing for St. Luke to do as well. That would have been a mission-oriented thing that they could have gotten really excited about. I walked the neighborhood, and it was a sad story. It was all black. And they'd come to our block parties and eat our hot dogs, and then we'd get a crowd of people. But they didn't come to church. So I just started walking the streets and talking to people on their porches, drinking their lemonade, all that kind of stuff. And they were very blunt. They said, Pastor, we appreciate your interest, but when that church came here, we wanted to come there. And you told us it was only for white folks. Now you want us to come and save you, and we're not going to do it. Quote, unquote.
Casey was April's signature.
We deserved it.
That neighborhood is probably almost white now.
You think it is?
Well, yeah, the transition. Gosh, 13th Street, 14th Street, 12th, 10th. I mean, it's amazing what's happening over there. It's so gentrified.
No kidding.
Unbelievable.
They were nice homes over there. I mean, this was not trash tough.
Right, no, I know.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
North of Catholic U and
It's all changed.
and east of
East North Capitol.
yeah.
Yeah, it's. I just can't.
Well, there's a big church there, and we had 2 pastors, and as I said, 60 kids in confirmation classes. A flying thing.
So are they living there too? Because they love it.
Neighborhood changed. The church couldn't change with it.
They're still there.
Wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty clear. I mean, if there's any lesson I've learned from these mergers that I've been involved with, is the races aren't necessarily that compatible.
Mm-mm.
There's an identity issue. Really, it's essential.
Well, what's also difficult is that we make the mistake of thinking that Latinos are Latinos, and they're not. There's Mexicans and there's Central Americans, and man, they are different crowds of people. We've had, I won't say a terrible experience over at Old Zion on New Hampshire Avenue. That's a Sierra Leone crowd. And they take no prisoners. I mean, they ran out everybody that wasn't Sierra Leone.
I had that sense in the church in Kensington. Phil Hirsch had me working over there with them. It was amazing. It wasn't the whites that were the problem. There was a group that wanted the Roma, and they could not, even the pastor could not see him pastoring.
I mean, the Oromo. Oh, yeah. Well, the whole Oromo thing is running their own nation in exile. They really are. So, You know, that's.
But they're going to die too. I mean, it was very apparent to me that if you keep trying to speak that language with people who are being born in the United States, they're going to lose their children too. You know, it's just. But I was really stunned, I think, by the unwillingness to absorb the congregation that was there, and welcome them in ways that kept them. That was really sad.
They didn't do that. Huh?
It was very apparent.
Well, that's been the issue at Grace all along, that those two groups couldn't get along. This is a spin-off out of Grace.
This church?
No, the Aromos that you were working with.
Oh, yes, that's right.
They fight among themselves. And I mean, they take no prisoners either. Those fights are violent.
All in the name of Christianity, right?
No, they are so tied up with their Oromo identity
Yeah.
that Christianity struggles to get recognized.
That's a shame.
I don't know how to turn this off.
They kept putting pictures of happy faces. They took my whole conscious. I never get anything down on Facebook. He calls himself a stalker. He watches everybody. There were lots of pictures yesterday.
Red light's still on.
I know it is. And it says on-off is down here, but I can't.
Is there lower? Is there a lower screen?
I can't get it to go there. Well, just let me pull a battery or something so we don't lose the class.